Imagine this, you are the most feared warrior of the 17th century, and you have outrun the Mughal armies, killed 7-foot general with a concealed weapon, escaped the most guarded court in the world, hidden inside the basket of sweets only, and built a navy from scratch to challenge the Dutch, the British, and the Portuguese, all at the same time. And you did it not just with a sword, but with your mind. Today, on the 395th birth anniversary of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, we will not just talk about warrior, we will talk about one of the most calculated, brilliant, and geopolitically sophisticated mind in recorded history. To understand Shivaji Maharaj's genius, we first need to understand the political chessboard of the 17th century India. Because this was not a simple battlefield, this was a multi-dimensional geopolitical trap. When Shivaji Maharaj was born, the Deccan was carved up between the Adil Shahi Sultanate of Bijapur in the west, the Qutub Shahi Sultanate of Golconda in the east, and the fading Nizam Shahi of Ahmednagar. Above all of them loomed the Mughal Empire, the first under the Shah Jahan and then under the Aurangzeb, absorbing every piece of a subcontinent it could reach. And Shivaji Maharaj's own father, Shahaji Raje Bhosle, served Bijapur as a military commander, and Shivaji Maharaj was born inside this political cage on 19 February 1630 at Shivneri Fort. And as he was growing, the three European powers then rising along the Indian coastline, the very coastline Shivaji Maharaj would one day command, were three of the most powerful naval empires in the world. The Portuguese, controlling the Goa in 1510 and holding the forts at Diu, Daman, Basen, Chaul, and Karanja, with the policy of forced religious conversion that enraged the local population. The Dutch East Indian Company, which had established a factory at Vengurla in 1649 and had significant commercial interest across the Konkan. The British East Indian Company, operating from the Surat and about to receive the Bombay Island in 1661 as a part of a royal marriage dowry. It was a small British company, but it was taking the calculated risk and always watching for opportunities. So the picture over here is nothing but Shivaji Maharaj was encircled on the land by the three sultanates and one empire, and hemmed in on the sea by the three European colonial power. A laser man would have chosen to serve one master, but Shivaji Maharaj chose to outplay all of them. And before Shivaji Maharaj could play the international game, and the way he built his internal political structure was revolutionary for the time. The fort strategy, the political architecture in the stone. At just 16-year-old, in 1645, Shivaji Maharaj captured the Torna fort, and this was not merely a military act, it was a political declaration. And at the time, Torna was held by the Bijapur. By taking it, Shivaji Maharaj declared that his loyalty was not with Adil Shah, it was to the Swaraj. He followed this with the methodical campaign over the next decade. He took Kondhana, Purandar, Rajgarh, Javri, and Suvarnadurga. Fort by fort, he was building a network system of impregnated strongholds across the western Ghats and the Konkan coast. His logic was simple but profound. Whoever held the forts held the land. Mughal cavalry was invisible on the open plains, but powerless in the mountain terrain. The Western Ghats were not just a geography, they were his greatest weapon. The next weapon that he built by himself is nothing but a Ashtapradhan Mandal, a cabinet that is centuries ahead of its time. So, after his coronation as a Chhatrapati on the 6th June 1674 at Raigad Fort, it was attended nearly by 50,000 people, and Shivaji Maharaj formalized one of the most sophisticated governance structure of the pre-modern era, the Ashtapradhan Mandal, the council of 8 ministers. The 8 roles were precisely defined. First one is the Peshwa. It is known as a Pantapradhan nowadays. So the Prime Minister for the general administration, the Amatya, the Finance Minister managing the state accounts, the Sachiv, Secretary drafting all royal edicts, the Mantri, it is nothing but Interior Minister responsible for intelligence and espionage, the Shivaji Maharaj spy master, the Senapati, commander-in-chief of a military forces, the Sumant, known as a Dabir as well, is nothing but a foreign minister managing the diplomatic relationship with the other sovereign. Nyadish, Chief Justice for the civil and criminal matters at that time, and the Pandit Rao, the highest priest managing the religious affairs. So, what made this system genuinely revolutionary is the appointments were based on a merit, not hereditary. Also, every royal decree requires a signature from the Chhatrapati, the Peshwa, and the endorsement from the four other key ministers. The power was distributed, checked, and accountable. Unlike the feudal courts of a sultanates, Shivaji Maharaj had created an institutional state, not a personal one. Along with governance, the second most important thing that every state required to flourish is nothing but a stable revenue source. So, the Shivaji Maharaj built a system to take it directly from the landowners, where Shivaji Maharaj dismantled the Jagirdari system, where nobles exploited peasants, and replaced it with a Raitwari system, where state dealt directly with the farmers. Revenue officials traveled village to village, assessing the land based on the actual yield. Also, the state demand was 30 to 40% of a gross produce. But crucially, during the famine, government provided loans and the agriculture equipment as well as the assistance to the farmers. Shivaji Maharaj also introduced the standardized Kathi, a measuring unit to prevent the local lots from the manipulating the land assessments. Along with that, Shivaji Maharaj introduced the great political tool, then with his political prowess, the Chaut and the Sardeshmukhi. The Chaut and the Sardeshmukhi contributes as a geopolitical tool. What exactly Chaut means? A quarter of the revenue of a territories outside the Swarajya has to be provided to the Swarajya. Either you pay this and be spared from the Maratha rates, or you have to face the Maratha rates. And what exactly the Sardeshmukhi was? An additional 10% was collected on the legal fiction that Shivaji Maharaj was hereditary head of all Deccan Deshmukhs. These were not just taxes, they were instruments of a political reach, extending the Maratha authority far beyond the former borders without requiring the conquest. And the next and the most important weapon is nothing but the Ganimi Kawa, the guerrilla warfare logic applied to the politics. So, Shivaji Maharaj's Ganimi Kawa, the guerrilla warfare, was more than a battlefield tactic. It was a philosophy of a statecraft. Be unpredictable, strike where unexpected, retreat when disadvantaged, never give the enemy the fight they want. In 1659, when Bijapur sent the general Afzal Khan with 20,000 troops to eliminate him, Shivaji Maharaj feigned fear and submission. He sent a letter asking for a peace. He appeared intimidated. He lured Khan deep into the mountain terrain near the Pratapgarh. And at meeting where the Khan expected an easy kill, Shivaji Maharaj struck first with the concealed Vagnaka, the iron tiger claw. That was Disbal the general. His pre-positioned troops swept down and destroyed the entire Bijapur army overnight. So, the psychological deception had become the weapon of a statecraft at that time. Now, let's see the grand game over here. We can say it as a Mughal grand game. If Shivaji Maharaj's handling of a Deccan Sultanates was brilliant, his decade-long chess match were running with the Aurangzeb was the most powerful emperor in the world and was nothing short of a geopolitical masterpiece as well. But Shivaji Maharaj sent a real message to the emperor, the sacking of Surat in 1664. So after the Aurangzeb's viceroy Shaista Khan occupied the Shivaji Maharaj's own city, Pune, and humiliated him by taking his childhood home, the Lal Mahal, Shivaji Maharaj's response was audacious. On the night of 5th April 1663, with just 400 handpicked men, he slipped through the city walls, crept through the familiar lanes, and launched a midnight raid on the Shaista Khan's own rest room. He didn't kill him, but Khan lost 3 fingers, fleeing through a window, and his son was killed. The Mughal viceroy of a Deccan, protected by a massive army, and been humiliated in his own chamber. Then, in January 1664, Shivaji Maharaj sacked the Surat against whatever the loot Shaista Khan had done in the area of Pune. To recover that, this was an action taken by the Shivaji Maharaj against the Surat. Surat was the wealthiest port city in the Mughal India, the commercial heartbeat of an empire. He tripped the city's merchants and Mughal officials of a wealth reportedly exceeding the 10 million rupees and was gone within 3 days before any counterforce arrived. The political message was unmistakable. The Mughal Empire could not protect its own valuable city. When all this happening, the tactical setback also came to the Swaraj. The Treaty of the Purandar 1665 was a tactical submission, and with the Surat loot, Aurangzeb was totally baffled. An Ingrez Aurangzeb sent Mirza Raja Jai Singh, one of the finest Mughal general at that time, with an army numbering around 1 lakh. Jai Singh was also a diplomat. He beside he besieged forts and cut the supply lines. By mid 1665, with the Purandar under siege, Shivaji Maharaj calculated that fighting to the last was not wisdom over here; it was a waste. So he sued for peace. The Treaty of Purandar on 11th June 1665 was a severe setback for the Swarajya. Shivaji Maharaj had to surrender 23 of his 35 forts to the Mughals and retain only 12. He had to place his son Shambhuraje in the Mughal service for a time being. To observers, this looked like a defeat, but Shivaji Maharaj had preserved the core of his kingdom, his army, and his people. He had bought time as well, and he had prepared for the next move, the great escape in the history, the Agra trap. In early 1666, Aurangzeb summoned Shivaji Maharaj to his court in Agra under the pretext of honor to formally receive him as a Mughal vassal. The reality was a trap. Shivaji Maharaj was known of all this. Before he left for Agra, he quietly visited all his remaining forts, alerted his commanders, and made each garrison militarily and administratively independent, so that even if he were captured or killed, the empire would continue without him. This was a political contingency planning of the highest order. He had stress tested his empire against his own absence. So he arrived in the Agra on 9th May 1666 and at the Darbar on 12th May at the Aurangzeb's birthday. Shivaji Maharaj was made to stand behind the Mughal Mansabdars of a lower rank, and in the Darbar, Shivaji Maharaj was made to stand behind the Mughal Mansabdars of a lower rank. The deliberate insult was met with historic response. Shivaji Maharaj walked out of a Mughal Darbar publicly and loudly, breaking every protocol of a Mughal etiquette. No vassal had ever done this. Aurangzeb's court urged immediate execution, but taking such action would have inflamed the entire Hindu Deccan, made him a martyr, and imprisonment was the compromise for the Aurangzeb. And so Shivaji Maharaj was placed under the house arrest under Polad Khan with 5,000 soldiers guarding him. So after that, what followed is one of the most celebrated episodes in the Indian history. The Shivaji Maharaj feigned severe illness. He began sending out enormous basket of sweets, fruits and flowers to the Brahmins, to the religious sannyasis and the poor across the Agra. The gesture was generous, constant and apparently harmless. So over weeks, the guards grew lax, and on 17th August 1666, Shivaji Maharaj and his son Shambhuraje concealed themselves inside those baskets. They were carried past the guards. By the time Aurangzeb realized what happened, Shivaji Maharaj was gone from Agra, traveling in the disguise across the hundreds of miles of enemy territory, sometimes as a sadhu, sometimes hidden in a merchant caravans, before finally reaching to the Raigad. The most powerful emperor in the world had been outwitted by the prisoner in his own capital. So as Shivaji Maharaj came into his capital, the counter-offensive strikes were started, taking everything back that was given in the Taha of Purandar. So between 1666 and 1670, Shivaji Maharaj maintained surface level peace with the Mughals. He accepted the title Raja. He appeared to all observers to be loyal vassal, and he was rebuilding, recruiting and rearming. In 1670, when Aurangzeb drew down his Deccan forces to fight the Afghans, Shivaji Maharaj launched a lightning counter-offensive attacks. In just 4 months, he recovered the major portion of all 23 forts surrendered under the Treaty of Purandar. He then sacked Surat a second time in October 1670, telling every power watching that he was back. And to get a legitimacy as a geopolitical strategy, the coronation happened in 1674. Shivaji Maharaj's coronation on June 6, 1674 was not a ceremony, it was a geopolitical declaration. Until that point, Shivaji Maharaj had operated as a powerful war lord, but not as a sovereign king. The coronation changed the legal and political architecture entirely. The Brahmin scholar Gagabhat officiated, pouring the sacred water from the seven rivers over the Shivaji Maharaj head, and 50,000 people gathered for the coronation ceremony. Shivaji Maharaj was proclaimed as a Chhatrapati, the Shakkarta, the founder of an era, and as a Hindavi Dharmodharak, the protector of a Hindu faith. He now had a sovereign legitimacy. He could sign treaties as a king. He could receive foreign ambassadors as an equal. The British agent Henry Oxender was also present at the coronation, and within days, Shivaji Maharaj had signed a trade agreement with the British on his own terms. The political brilliance of the timing was precise. He crowned himself, then immediately dealt with the foreign powers from a position of a formal sovereignty. Now we come to the most geopolitically complex dimensions of Shivaji Maharaj's rule: his management of a British, Portuguese, and Dutch, the three naval empires simultaneously operating on his coast. He could not fight them all at once, but he could not simply ignore them as well. He had to calibrate, play them against each other, punish and reward, and build his own counterforce from scratch. So foundation for it is nothing but building the Maratha navy. In October 1657, when Shivaji Maharaj captured Kalyan Bhiwandi, he immediately recognized the strategic impossibility of controlling the Konkan coast without a navy. Indian merchant vessels were at the mercy of European warships at that time. Even Mughal trading ships had to carry Portuguese cartage and passage to sail safely. So Shivaji Maharaj was the first Indian ruler in the centuries to recognize the sea power as a political necessity. He founded the Maratha Navy in 1659. A Portuguese letter dated 6 August 1659 already records the alarm from the Goa. They mentioned a son of a Shahaji Raje, rebel against the Adil Shah, has captured areas near the Basen and the Chaul. He has grown strong. He has constructed some fighting vessels in the Bhiwandi, Kalyan, and Panvel ports, and we are forced to be cautious. So these were the words in a Portuguese letter. So Shivaji Maharaj also played smartly over here. He sought help from the Portuguese engineers for shipbuilding, using the very people he would later confront to build his counter forces. He studied European ships' design and incorporated their best features and added his own features in the shipbuilding. His fleet grew to approximately 500 ships divided into the two squadrons, where sailors came from the fishing communities only. Those were resided to the coastline, and he built the sea forts at Jaigarh, Vijayadurga, Sindhudurga, and Suvarnadurga, where Sindhudurga built on a rocky island of Malvan and was described by the contemporary Maratha chronicle as a built to nullify the pride of a versatile topikars. Topikars being the Marathi word for the Europeans as hat wearers. So this fortress of Jaigarh, Vijayadurga, Sindhudurga, and Suvarnadurga was specifically designed to threaten the Portuguese Goa. And with his mighty prowess, Shivaji Maharaj earned the title the father of the Indian Navy. Now we will check on the European front. The British first. From enemy armor to the negotiated treaty. The chapter 1. So the British Maratha relationship began through a commercial dispute. When Shivaji Maharaj captured the Rajapur after the Afzal Khan episode, the local British factory was caught in the crossfire. A British finance official owed them money, and British had seized one of the ship in the Maratha controlled territory as a collateral. So Shivaji Maharaj demanded it back. The British refused it, and this small incident seeded a long hostile relationship. Along with that, the Panada betrayal was happened in 1660. In 1660, when Shivaji Maharaj was trapped inside the Panada fort under the siege by the Bijapur Siddhi Johar, the British East Indian Company factory at Rajapur sold the grenades directly to the Siddhi Johar and supplied severe English artillery to help the bombarding at Panhada. They flew the AIC flag conspicuously during the bombarding. The British had calculated that Shivaji Maharaj was finished, but he escaped from the Panada through the brilliant body double deception, deploying a barber who resembled him in palanquin, while Shivaji Maharaj slipped through 600 soldiers in darkness. The subsequent year, the Marathas retaliated. They attacked the British factory at Rajapur, capturing it, imprisoning the officer Henry Revington, Randolph Taylor, and Philip Guilford for 2 years. Also, the floor of the factory was dug up searching for hidden valuables by the Maratha. And this was not just a commercial raid, it was a political punishment delivered with precision. So here comes chapter number 3, the negotiation and pressure from 1663 to 1674. So the British desperately wanted to re-establish their trade presence. Lieutenant Stephen F. Stick was sent to Raigad to negotiate directly with Shivaji Maharaj. The talks collapsed over the Rajapur indemnity. British wanted compensation, Shivaji Maharaj refused it. Then, in October 1670, Shivaji Maharaj dispatched forces to harass the British Bombay, blocking their woodcutting operations from leaving the city because they had refused to sell him military supplies, and this was economic coercion as a political tool. In September 1675, British emissary Samuel Austin arrived at Raigad demanding the compensation for the Rajapur factory again. He met Shivaji Maharaj with a young Shambhuraje sitting beside him. So Shivaji Maharaj was training his successor in foreign affairs. This is a live lesson. Then comes the chapter number 4, the 1674 agreement on Shivaji Maharaj's terms. On June 12, 1674, day after his coronation, Shivaji Maharaj signed a trade agreement with British agent Henry Oxender, who had attended the coronation. So read the term carefully over here. The British received permission to trade in Swarajya, right to open factory at Rajapur, Dabhod, Chaul and Kalyan, where Shivaji Maharaj retained first the right to levy 2.5% octroi. What it means? An entry tax on goods in the Swarajya on all British goods, so-called import duty nowadays. The second term, full refusal of a British claim over a maritime salvage for the shipwrecks. The shipwrecks are nothing but the destruction, sinking or loss of a vessel at a sea due to the accident, storms and hitting rocks. And the third term is nothing but refusal to ally with a Siddhi of a Janjira, which would have constrained his military operations. And the fourth term, prohibition of a British coinage with Maratha domains, asserting the complete monetary sovereignty. And he never paid the Rajapur indemnity, as the factory was attacked by the Marathas previously. The Rajapur factory closed permanently in 1682 and British abandoned the claim as well. So British came to Shivaji Maharaj's coronation seeking a trade deal on their favor, but they got one on Shivaji Maharaj's terms. The colonial power had negotiated as the subordinate party. There were some words of Portuguese governor of Goa recorded after the Shivaji Maharaj's demise. He mentioned Shivaji Maharaj was far more dangerous in a peace than in war. Now his demise has relieved us from the terror. A European colonial governor feared Shivaji Maharaj's diplomatic moves more than his armies. So this was a British chapter. Now the topics comes on a Portuguese. From the technical partner to the political target. The early alliance with them was for technology transfer. When Shivaji Maharaj began building his navy in 1657 to 59, he sought and received technical help from the Portuguese shipbuilders. The Portuguese were cautiously supportive because Shivaji Maharaj was an enemy of their adversaries, the Deccan Sultanates. The implicit understanding worked for both over here. Then one setback came in the relation of both Portuguese and the Marathas. The relationship broke down when the Portuguese began supplying war provisioning and ammunition to Siddhis of Janjira, and Shivaji Maharaj persisted coastal adversaries. They had chosen a side, and here Shivaji Maharaj's response was methodic. The Basrul naval raid in February 1665. Naval power on display over here. On 8 February 1665, Shivaji Maharaj dispatched a naval force of 85 small brigade, 3 large ships, and craft carrying 4,000 soldiers. He sailed from the Marwan, slipped past the Portuguese at Goa undetected, evaded the Dutch at the Vengula, passed undetected Portuguese again at Panji and Vasco and bypassed the British at the Karwar and reaching to the Karnataka coast directly. On 13 Feb 1665, the fleet captured the Portuguese-held port of Basrud. This was the first major offensive naval operation by an indigenous Indian force against the European colonial power, a demonstration of rage, stealth, and coordination that sent shockwaves through every European trading house on the Indian coast. After that, in 1667, Shivaji Maharaj attacked the Portuguese region of Bardesh in northern Goa, citing forced religious convergence and interference at Dichol. His forces captured the Portuguese district of Mardagad and Bardes, threatening to cut all the land communication to the Goa itself. The Portuguese sent 10,000 soldiers in the surprise midnight raid, but Shivaji Maharaj's intelligence network had already tipped him off through the local boatman at Kanhoji Tandal. He fell back a mile, formed a battle lines, and met them in open combat. The Portuguese then sent peace ambassador loaded with gifts, magnificent clothes, 20,000 gold crowns as an apology. The treaty that followed required them to supply cannons and jewelry annually and to grant Maratha merchants vessels free passage. A European colonial empire was paying the tribute to an Indian king, and separately Shivaji Maharaj collected Chauth as well, the one-quarter tribute from the Portuguese in the Daman region. The Portuguese were paying protection money to a Maratha king, and this happened during his lifetime. The next one is nothing but a covert operation in Goa. In another dimension of his Portuguese strategy, Shivaji Maharaj secretly began sending a small number of his men into the Goa itself. The plan was, once enough Maratha loyalists were inside, they would launch an internal revolt. The Portuguese viceroy somehow became aware of this plan before it could be executed. But the episode reveals the depth of Shivaji Maharaj's long-term strategic thinking. He was preparing to take Goa from within as well as from the without. The final threat over here is nothing but the Fonda Fort and Beyond Fort. In April 1675, Shivaji Maharaj besieged and captured Fonda Fort, a strategically vital position between the Maratha domain and Portuguese territory. At late as 1680, just before his demise, his army had assembled at Fonda for that appeared to be a major campaign into the Portuguese Goa. Only his illness and sad demise in April 1680 prevented what might have been a final assault. And the last chapter over here is about the Dutch, where Dutch managed neutrality and economic leverage as well. So, of the three of European powers, the Dutch relationship was Shivaji Maharaj's most elegant exercise in managing the neutrality. Dutch had their factory at Vengurla since 1649. When Shivaji Maharaj disrupted the Kundal region in 1663, Dutch trade was affected. Dutch had also supplied gunpowder to his local adversary, Lakhan Sawant, and from there confrontation loomed. But in 1665, when Mughal Subedar of Surat asked Dutch to help destroy the Maratha naval forces, Dutch declined that. They had done the calculations. Helping the Mughals against the Shivaji Maharaj offered no commercial upside and all the risk only. So Shivaji Maharaj rewarded this neutrality precisely. He left Dutch factories at Surat untouched during both raids in 1664 as well as in 1670. He allowed the Dutch to build a factory at Dabhol. During his Karnataka campaign as well, he assured and he issued special protection permits to the Dutch factory workers and ensured their factories at Porto Novo and Tegnapatnam were unharmed. In exchange, Dutch paid a tribute to the Shivaji Maharaj. An economic arrangement formalized the political understanding. It is one of the world's great trading empire was then voluntarily paying tribute to the Indian king without a single shot being fired at them. So the Shivaji Maharaj had managed three European colonial powers simultaneously, publishing the rewarding, pressuring and protecting while building his own navy to challenge their maritime dominance. The geopolitical complexity of this balancing act has rarely been equalized by any contemporary ruler of that time. So the Shivaji Maharaj's demise on 3rd April 1680 at Raigad Fort at the age of 50, he had ruled as a Chhatrapati for just 6 years, and his entire active political career was barely 35 years. So in that time, he had built an independent sovereign state from nothing, resisted the largest empire in the world, established a navy, a cabinet system, reformed the revenue collection, maintained the religious tolerance across the communities, and negotiated as an equal with the three European colonial powers simultaneously. Let's see now the geopolitical aftermath. After Shivaji Maharaj's demise, the empire continued to expand. Under Sambhaji Maharaj, it was expanded, and further under the Peshwas in 18th century, the Maratha became the dominant power in India. When the British first forfeited the Bombay in 1739, it was directly in the response to the watching the Maratha defeat the Portuguese at the Vasai and realizing that they could be next. So the Shivaji Maharaj's vision of an Indian maritime power strong enough to challenge the European dominance, and it was indicated even after his demise. So, what made him a political genius? He played a seven front chess game: Bijapur, Mughals, Portuguese, British, Dutch, Siddhis, and the challenge of building the cohesive internal state as well. Simultaneously, he knew when to fight and when to negotiate. He got setbacks, but always in the service of a goal that never changed: the Hindavi Swarajya, self rule for the people of this land. He is studied today in the naval academies, political science departments, and management schools. In 2022, Prime Minister unveiled the new ensign of a Indian Navy, drawing the direct from the seal of a Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, a recognition that his maritime vision remained a foundational template for the Indian strategic identity. And over here, one final thought. In the 17th century, a young man from a small Jagir near Pune looked at a world being carved up between the empires: Mughal, Adil Shahi, Qutub Shahi, Portuguese, Dutch, British, and decided that none of them would define his people fate. He built something that had not existed before, and the word for that he built was nothing but Swaraj. The idea had come from that a people can govern themselves, that sovereignty belonged to the people of the land, and this was considered as a radical thought in 1640. But it became the foundation of a modern India now, 300 years later. So I salute the prowess of a Shivaji Maharaj in every field. And likewise, you can put your thoughts in the comments what you think about him. So that is all from my side for today. Have a great Shiv Jayanti celebration. Jai Bhavani, Jai Shivaji. Thank you for watching till this point.